Hi there, my name's James Kelly, and welcome back to Scott Goes Pop. On the day that Tory Shadow Minister Danny Kruger defected to Reform UK, therefore bringing Reform UK's number of MPs back to five, which in the long run may prove a little bit of a problem for the SNP because it opens up the possibility that if there's a snowball effect from this, and if there are more defections from the Tories to Reform, and it sounds like possibly there will be, the SNP could eventually be replaced by Reform as the fourth largest group in the Commons, which, some people will say is purely symbolic. But I think it's a little bit more than that because under the current situation, the SNP could make the argument to the broadcasters, look, you give all this lavish coverage to Reform, you never stop banging on about them, you always have their spokespeople on. Well, we've actually got more MPs than they do, so what are you going to do about that? And I think that's quite a powerful argument, and they wouldn't want to lose that. However, there's not a lot they can do about that, although I would just note that they've created a problem for themselves, nothing they can do to reverse this now, which is that Stephen Flynn and Stephen Gethins are both planning to try and come across to the Scottish Parliament, which will disqualify them from Westminster and create by-elections. So that was a needless problem the SNP have created for themselves, which could theoretically reduce their own representation from 9 to 7 and make it even easier for Reform to overtake them, which is unfortunate, but that process is now in train and can't be stopped. Paradoxically, the defection may actually be a good thing for Keir Starmer because, anything that puts pressure on the opposition leader takes pressure off the government. And my goodness, there has been a lot of pressure on the government. The other day, I saw a journalist say that there was an end of days feeling about the Labour benches at the moment, and there was a sense that the government was coming to an end. And I thought, well, what does that actually mean? Does that mean that the government itself will be toppled? The Labour government will leave office, and there'll be a general election? Clearly, it doesn't mean that because it's almost impossible for that to happen so soon after last year's general election. So presumably, what it means is that Keir Starmer will depart and he'll be replaced by a soft left leader, and effectively there'll be a change of regime that will take the country in a reasonably different policy direction. And I think it's correct if Starmer does fall, his replacement would very likely be from the soft left. Because if a prime minister is toppled in time of crisis, his party is not going to look for more of the same. They're going to look for a sort of correction that will pull them in a different direction and try to resolve some of the problems. And Labour members are hardly going to want to push the party even further to the right. Keir Starmer is arguably the most right-wing Labour MP in the entire parliamentary party. He's arguably pulled Labour as far to the right as it's ever gone. So of course the correction is going to take it back to the soft left. And it would be the soft left rather than the Corbynite left because the rules have been basically stitched up to prevent the Corbynites from ever getting into power in Labour ever again. The obvious king over the water, the obvious soft left king over the water is Andy Burnham, and the water in question is the Manchester Ship Canal, because of course Andy Burnham is currently the mayor of Greater Manchester, which creates a practical problem for him, a very substantial practical problem for him, because it's a reason why he is not currently an MP and he is not currently eligible to even stand for Labour leader. And in the UK system, there is only one way to resolve that problem, and that is to get back into Parliament via a by-election, which is not going to be easy at all, given that, well, first of all, he'd have to get through the party machinery, and Starmer could theoretically prevent him from being selected as a candidate in a by-election. But then the bigger problem is that there's a substantial chance he would then lose that by-election because Labour are performing so poorly relative to Reform UK, and Reform UK would pile all sorts of resources into trying to beat Burnham. I noticed a few weeks ago that Andy Burnham was actually the second favourite to Wes Streeting in the betting to become the next Labour leader, and actually now looking at it, he's the clear favourite. He's still only rated as effectively a 20% chance, but he is ahead of Streeting and Yvette Cooper and Shabana Mahmood in the betting. And my initial interpretation of Burnham's strong showing in the betting was that people must be thinking about the longer term future, about Labour losing the next general election and then Andy Burnham coming in as opposition leader or maybe even third party leader if Labour have slipped to third place by then. But actually, if you look at the betting for the next Prime Minister, if I can find it. It's in a different section. Um, yeah, Burnham is he's not clearly ahead of West Streeting, but he's more or less level pegging with West Streeting, which does imply that there are a substantial number of people out there who think this is really credible that Andy Burnham will imminently get back into Parliament via a by-election, which is a tall order. Andrew Neil, who of course, is not impartial on this, it's his worst nightmare that the government could move towards the left, even the soft left, was gloating about how if Burnham stands in the by-election, he'll lose, and that'll end his career, not Keir Starmer's. Now, of course, the fact that Andrew Neil is a contemptible character doesn't necessarily mean he's wrong about everything. But is he wrong about this? I am not sure because I'm not sure Andy Burnham has actually got that much to lose by standing in a by-election because if he doesn't take his chance now, he'll have missed, there's a chance he'll have missed the boat altogether. If he just stays as Mayor of Greater Manchester, sees out his term, chances are somebody else will replace Keir Starmer and he'll miss the boat and he may never become Labour leader. So I think arguably there's more to lose by him not taking what appears to be a big risk. It may not be that big a risk because as I understand the rules, correct me if I'm wrong, although being Mayor of Greater Manchester combines the police and fire commissioner role, I should say, which disbars him from being an MP. I don't think it disbars him from standing to be an MP. I think he'd only be disqualified at the point at which he's elected. So he could stand with a little bit of safety in mind, knowing that if he loses, he could carry on as Greater Manchester Mayor. And in terms of whether he would, well, the next question, of course, is whether he can get selected as a candidate or would Starmer try and stop him. Big danger for Starmer in trying to stop him. The uproar in the Labour ranks, rank and file Labour members and so on, if it was seen that Starmer was trying to stop Burnham for such obviously self-interested reasons, I think that would be a bigger risk to Starmer than doing the opposite. So probably he would just resign himself to letting Burnham stand and seeing what happens. And perhaps if Burnham wins, he would then try and neutralise the threat by giving Burnham some sort of poison chalice job in government, and then Burnham would have to decide whether to accept it. And so it would all get very sort of complicated, and there'd be lots of sort of five-dimensional chess going on. I don't think Keir Starmer is capable of playing five-dimensional chess, but you know what I mean. So I think you could imagine a situation certainly where Burnham was allowed to stand as a Labour candidate in the by-election. Then would he win? Well, although the odds would seem to be heavily against it because of the reform threat to Labour, if it was so obvious to voters in that by-election that the way to get rid of a Starmer government is to elect Andy Burnham in that specific situation, then it's possible that, just as a completely one-off situation, that might be a by-election that Labour could win and could defeat reform simply because Labour would be seen as the anti-Starmer, anti-government option. But of course, Burnham himself couldn't run in that way, so he'd have to rely on sort of coded messaging and for the media to do that work for him. I don't know what would happen, but I don't think it's inconceivable that Burnham could get back into Parliament, albeit as a tall order, no question about that. But as I said, I don't think he's got much to lose, so it's possible he might go for it. But again, the SNP would probably prefer him not to go for it or not to go for it anytime soon because that actually suits them quite well. I mean, the current government is such a catastrophe that, it is much better for the SNP if Starmer stays in place, at least until next May, until the Holyrood election is out of the way, and then the SNP will take full advantage of Labour's unpopularity. I'm not saying that Andy Burnham would necessarily have a transformative effect on Labour fortunes, but you could imagine him having some sort of honeymoon, and it would be unfortunate if that honeymoon coincided with the Holyrood election. So maybe it's just as well if the Danny Kruger defection temporarily takes a bit of the heat off Starmer and he just sort of Labour just stay in this horrific purgatory for them for a good few more months and allow the SNP to get a good win in the Holyrood election. Incidentally, while I'm on the subject of betting, it might interest you to know that Nigel Farage is currently the clear frontrunner to be the next Prime Minister. Which is interesting, of course, because it implies that there's a fair chance that Keir Starmer will stagger on to the next 4 years and then will only be replaced by Nigel Farage at that point. Nigel Farage is not odds-on favourite. I should stress he's regarded as odds against, but he's the single person regarded as the most likely to become the next Prime Minister. And Reform UK are currently 50-50 chance to have the most seats at the next general election, which is a remarkable situation for a party that still only has 5 MPs right now and with 4 years still to go. So, certainly the punters seem to think that the Reform UK bid for power is the real deal. Whether they're right about that and whether Farage can keep things together for a whole 4 years, there's reasons to be skeptical about that, but we shall see. Anyway, that's it for now. If you're enjoying this content, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Bye for now.